Welcome to Natural Allergy and Histamine Relief. I'm Katy Wallace. I'm a naturopathic doctor in Madison, Wisconsin. Human Nature is the name of my business. Before I begin, I like to say that this information is for health education reasons only and should not be taken in place of medical advice from your doctor. I am giving this talk in coordination with the Willy Street Co-op. I give these monthly webinars that are free. And another service that I provide through the Willy Street Co-op is one-on-one private sessions at the co-op locations or via Zoom for just a $45 fee. So you get a private 45-minute session for $45. I do have openings in October. So if you're interested, I just have a handful of openings every month. You can either email me or call me to find out about registering for one of those spots. Next month, I'll be talking about kissing those sugar blues goodbye. So if you have a sugar addiction or know someone with a sugar addiction, we're going to be talking about some key tools that are instrumental in getting over sugar. Also, I will be teaching my annual body tune-up workshop, which is where I take a group of people through a 6-week food and functional medicine-based course that focuses on the detoxification organs. I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go today, because it does some of the concepts that I use in the class apply to what we're talking about today. The 16th year that I'm teaching this workshop. I teach it once a year, so this is your chance until next fall to do it in the group, which is great because you get a lot of camaraderie and support. And I do have some scholarships available. The deadline is tomorrow for that scholarship application, so you can apply at my website for that. If you guys have any questions while I'm talking, feel free to put them in the chat and I will come back to questions at the end. So today we're going to cover natural allergy and histamine relief. We're going to start with what am I talking about? What is histamine and what are allergies? What are some food-based approaches to help you get relief from allergies? What are some of the top supplements that can help? And then what are the tools that help you dig a little deeper when you need more than a dietary change or some supplements to help? So in case you have to leave early, this is the summary slide for the whole talk. The first step in addressing allergies and histamine issues naturally is to figure out what is bothering your immune system. The second step is, and to remove it. Once you've identified what is bothering you and you can remove it, then you can move on to the second step, which is adjusting the diet to further reduce the histamine that is being added to the gut and the digestive system in your body through the foods you're eating. Next, you need to think about how can you promote detoxification, which is how to get excess histamine and excess triggers for histamine out of your body naturally. And then finally, for a lot of people, you need to do step 4, which is doing some detective work to try to figure out why is the immune system under stress, and why are you chronically having problems with histamine in the long term. So that's what we're going to cover today. So the definition of an allergy is a very strong or a damaging immune response in your body from a typical allergen like pollen or dust or fur or a food. Your immune system becomes hypersensitive and thus overreactive to this trigger, and it causes an allergy. From a naturopathic perspective, being a naturopathic doctor, I view a person with strong allergies or a lot of allergy problems as a sign that their immune system needs more support. It's under too much stress, and that is why it is becoming damaging and hyperactive to the person. Generally, an allergy involves a histamine response. Histamines are chemicals made by your immune system when there's a trigger or an irritant. So histamines are chemicals that start the process of moving the irritants out of your body. So they'll make you sneeze. They'll make you feel like you have a scratchy throat. Your eyes are watery. You have a rash. So you all are probably familiar with these symptoms. What most people aren't aware of, though, is that histamines can create a lot of other symptoms besides the common allergy. So flushing or migraines or a slow heartbeat, low blood pressure, lightheadedness, rosacea, diarrhea and loose stools, mood disorders, and I would add sleep disorders are less obvious histamine signs that a lot of people are suffering from. So what's happening with the body when it is sensitive to something is it will send a message to your mast cells. Mast cells are specialized cells in the immune system. They're found in our gut, in our mouth, in our nose, in our skin, in our lungs. We have more mast cells in those areas, and those are the cells that release the histamines. And so histamines are basically helping to boost blood flow to this part of the body that's affected and initiate inflammation, which then triggers a bunch of other chemicals by your immune system to help move whatever the trigger is out of your body. And one of those main chemicals, if you've tuned into any of my other talks, is called pro-inflammatory cytokines. It's kind of a mouthful, but pro-inflammatory cytokines are chemicals released by your immune system when it's aggravated, it's sensing the histamine release. And it's important to bring up even in this talk because a lot of people with histamine issues have more chronic ongoing issues with their health too. And so not only managing the histamine, but managing the pro-inflammatory cytokines becomes very important to help get someone out of a more active autoimmune condition, for example, or just reacting to a lot of foods or other chemicals over time, just becoming a person that's, their health is wearing down and they're getting more sensitive to things as time goes on. Here's a picture of what histamines would look like when the mast cells release histamine in the skin. The person has hives, so it's very itchy. You can see it's red. There's a lot of blood moving there as the body's trying to move out the thing that aggravated the immune system. It can also look like this, where someone has a headache or they have sinus pressure. They're very fatigued because of the histamine release. So it's very important to figure out what the trigger is and remove it. And so many of you who have tuned in today might have already covered step one. An example of step one would be to go to a medical allergist and get tested to find out what you're sensitive to. So the medical allergist will test you for IgE antibodies. And sometimes that can be really helpful, but in a lot of cases, it might just identify a couple of things that you're very sensitive to. And even when you try to control those things, you're still sort of having this ongoing histamine reaction. So it can be helpful to remove the top food triggers, and we're going to talk about that momentarily. It can also help to try to figure out what other triggers are. So just to kind of give you a visual of what's happening in the body, I learned this from one of my mentors. If my finger is a trigger and my body is encountering it every day, you can do this at home too. Just pick up your finger and rub the back of your hand and pretend that the finger rubbing the hand is a food maybe that your body has become sensitive to, or it's a microbe. That could be the second thing, like a pathogen in your gut that's out of balance that your body doesn't like and is sort of mounting a response to. It could be a environmental allergen, like a common example would be pollen. Okay, got pollen in there aggravating the mast cells, releasing histamine, or it could be something like a chemical or a metal. Okay, those all represent very common triggers. We'll talk about some other triggers like mold and things that happen in the gut biome later in this talk. So I can do this for a couple minutes and it's not really bothering me, but what if we did this for the next hour? Or what if I did this to my hand for the next 24 hours? You know, my hand would become raw, my body would start to break down, the skin there and the tissues underneath would start to break down. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of what happens when the body is continually aggravated by the trigger all the time, as a way to explain how it presents kind of a chronic immune stress to the person if they can't get rid of that trigger. So that's always so, so important to try to figure out what the trigger is and eliminate it. You can use food sensitivity tests to help with this. It also can really help to do like an elimination diet to figure it out as well. And there's a lot of extensive testing for other antibodies besides the medical allergy antibodies to figure out what's going on too. So once you've done that, it's important to think about changing the diet. Okay, so let's say I have allergies. I've identified that pollen is a real big problem for me. And so I've, taken steps to vacuum my house and filter the air inside and reduce my exposure to pollen overall, but I'm still having problems. My next step would be to change my diet to try to eliminate food triggers that might be there. So right here on the slide, I have listed the top 6 allergens to avoid: gluten, sugar, dairy, corn, soy, and peanut. So these are the top foods that the immune system is sensitive to. And with the exception of sugar, it's all because of the large peptide structure of the food. All of those foods, the exception being sugar, have a very large peptide structure. Peptides are just the small proteins in the food. So every single food is made up of peptides. And when your immune system is reacting to foods, it's reacting to the peptides. Basically, your body's going to make an antibody to the peptide of the food. And gluten, corn, dairy, soy, peanut, etc., all have the largest peptide structure. So it's like a big bullseye for your immune system that's already a little aggravated and hyperactive. So, it's not that I have a personal vendetta against gluten or dairy. I agree, they're very delicious. But these foods have such a big peptide structure that they become a target for your already aggravated immune system. And when you can eliminate those foods, it helps a lot with reducing the immune system aggravation, and people start to get symptomatic relief. So instead, you want to think about eating things as alternatives. So I have like some good grass-fed animal protein, lots of vegetables. Instead of eating a lot of grain-based foods, it helps to eat more vegetable-based carbohydrates, like I have pictured. It's also really valuable to eat a lot of fat. I know many of us have lived through the low-fat craze of the 1980s and 90s, and even some people still live in a low-fat universe, but it's not very good for us. Fats are really important with detoxification, with moving out common allergens and things that bother us, and they're also a key way to get the fat-based vitamins that we need for a healthy immune system. So many times when I see people one-on-one in my private practice and they've got a compromised immune system, or they just need help with their immune system and help with allergies, then we're going to measure their fat-soluble vitamins, and we're going to start to adjust the diet to include more fat-soluble vitamins. So they'll come naturally with the fat, but the reason the fat-soluble vitamins are so helpful is that they are doing something called immune modulation. And so for the immune system specifically, the fats help the immune systems behave better. So I have a picture here of my daughters. You can see on the left, they're like, if they're unsupervised, they're going a little bonkers. They might be a little impulsive. And on the right, you can see they've got a grandma there in the picture, and they're very well behaved and looking pleasant. The immune system is kind of like my kids in that if you have a lot of the fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamin D, for example, vitamins A and K, they help support the mom cells or the B cells. And those B cells help kind of train and tame the other immune cells so that they're not hyperreactive. So it's very important to eat a lot of good, nourishing, fat-based foods. Once you've done that, you can do a histamine diet. A histamine diet is focused specifically on the foods that are low in histamine, and you're avoiding the foods high in histamine. It's not the easiest diet to do. It's somewhat restricted. So usually what I suggest people do is follow it for 1 week. So follow it for 7 days, follow it correctly. And if you feel better, like your brain fog is gone, the chronic pain, the migraines, the horrible rash starting to get better, then you know this is a diet for you. And then you can follow it for several weeks while you're working on other root causes for the issue if necessary. So I'm going to go through the basic components of a histamine diet that would help someone who is having a lot of histamine-based problems. First of all, you're going to want to avoid fermented foods. So I've got pickles, vinegars, alcohol. These are all examples of histamine foods and fermented foods. If you are wondering about a food and it's fermented, it's going to be high histamine. The reason is that as foods are fermented, they just accumulate a lot of histamines. So if you're wondering about kombucha or sauerkraut or yogurt or whatever, the answer is yes, it's going to be higher histamine, and you're going to want to eliminate it if you want to follow this strict histamine diet for 7 days to see if histamine is the root of your issue. Another example of a group of foods to avoid, sorry for the gross picture, but I wanted to make it something memorable rather than boring, is overripe foods. And the food might not even look like it's got a lot of mold or it's really overripe, but as foods mature, once they're picked, they accumulate a lot of histamines. And of course, then once they have molds and things on them, then they've got more histamine too. So an example of this in practice would be to only eat very fresh produce or produce that's been frozen when it's fresh. Or if you like potatoes, you're going to choose new potatoes that were just dug up that, within a day or two, versus potatoes that have been in storage. The longer they're in storage, the more they're going to accumulate histamines. The same would be true for any other foods. The fresher it is, the lower the histamine content in general, and the longer the beans, rice, whatever it is, have been sitting in storage, the more histamines they're going to have. Another very high histamine food is going to be any processed or canned food. So, canned fish, canned soup. Also thinking about like TV dinners, pre-processed food is going to be much higher in histamines than fresh food and would be avoided on a special diet like this. The other thing that needs to be avoided is reheated foods. So think about trays of foods available in a buffet. Those would be higher histamine, or maybe food that you reheated at home and it's a little bit further gone than you realized. That food is going to be very high in histamine too. So after you prepare the food, the more that it sits versus being frozen right away, the more it's going to accumulate histamine. So you have to be careful of leftovers that have been that are too old if you're sensitive to histamines and have a lot of histamine in your body to begin with. Now I want to drill down and talk more specifically about foods that contain histamines. So fish and seafood, while they are very health-giving, probably one of the best foods you could ever eat, are very sensitive to accumulating histamines. So they have to be absolutely fresh or frozen when fresh. So it's worth it to talk to the person behind the fish counter, or do whatever you need to do to make sure if you're eating fish and seafood that it's very healthy and that it's freshly caught or frozen. Meat and any food really, once it's cured, like sausages or like a hard salami, is going to accumulate more histamines in that curing process. So fresh meat's going to be fine, but meat that's not absolutely fresh might present a problem where it's introducing more histamines to the gut of somebody who already has a lot of histamines. Cheese, obviously, again, it's kind of fermented and cultured for a long time, accumulating histamines. And so any aged cheese or highly processed cheese is going to be a problem for someone with histamines. I think the other ones I already talked about, except tomato, spinach, eggplant, and avocado are also very high histamine and should be avoided. We talked about the ferments here, and that would include things like soy sauce and Worcestershire sauce. So as if that weren't enough to be thinking about, there are some foods that will trigger your body to release more histamine. So they aren't necessarily high in histamine themselves, but they will prompt a histamine reaction in our bodies. So alcohol, strawberries, nuts, including nut butters and nut flours, seafood, fish, chocolate. Chocolate can be a big one and can be a little difficult for people because it's very high histamine. Tomatoes, ketchup, any canned tomato products, etc., and citrus fruit. So that includes lemons and limes. So if you're having an allergy overload or you've got a really bad rash that's not going away, these are going to be foods you're going to want to avoid as well until the situation resolves. So as I mentioned, typically with a histamine diet, because it can be very challenging to follow it, I suggest people just follow it for about a week. If you find in that week that, yes, this has helped you a lot, then you're going to want to keep going with it for several weeks. Usually for a lot of people, after several weeks, the body is going to adjust and start healing and start resolving some of the histamine related issues. And then the person can reintroduce some of the foods they're missing. So one thing to keep in mind when you're reintroducing foods is that you have like a set amount of histamine tolerance every day. So you can think of it like you're filling up a bucket. So you might be able to get away with eating one high histamine food a day, and that might fill up your bucket. And you would be symptomatic if you ate more than that. So like you might get away with like a cup of orange juice as an example of a high histamine food or a histamine releasing food. But you couldn't also eat sausages and vinegar and kombucha or whatever, right? So you still have to think about, yeah, you have a little bit of wiggle room in there after you've experienced some progress, but you still probably can't overdo it. There are some supplements that are very helpful for addressing the histamine response. Quercetin is one of the most popular and is a very safe supplement. You can use it with children. You can use it with elderly people. There is a small subset of the population who are unable to eliminate quercetin fast enough. And if in those people, quercetin can cause sleep problems. So just a heads up, if you try quercetin and find that your sleep's not as good, then I usually recommend quercetin in a combination, like one of the ones pictured here. I find usually if it's in a combination with other things that help histamine, it's better tolerated. But some people might not tolerate it and might just need to rely on other remedies. So some of those other things include nettle leaf, NAC and acetylcysteine can also be helpful because of its role in detoxification. It's also anti-mucolytic, which helps with cutting down mucus and allergy-related symptoms that create mucus. I also really like butterbur. Butterbur is an herb that helps lower the level of histamine in the body. So it can be really helpful for someone who's having allergies. The one thing to know about butterbur, and it is safe to use in kids and older adults as well, but it is in the ragweed family. So if the person who's taking it is really sensitive to the ragweed, for example, then butterbur might not be a good fit. Another supplement that's really popular for people who suffer from histamine issues is called a DAO enzyme. So diamine oxidase is an enzyme that helps break down histamine in our gut. And not everybody is good at producing as much of this enzyme or might benefit from a supplement. So you can look for a DAO supplement. And to give you an example, some people will use this once they've sort of recognized that histamine is their issue and they follow a pretty careful diet. They might use a DAO enzyme when they're going out to eat. And I would add that that's kind of a common presentation for people with histamine issues, is they might kind of have an issue more or less under control, but then they go out to eat and they develop loose stools. They get very lightheaded, even sweaty, very nauseous after the meal. That is usually pointing to a histamine issue. And someone in that kind of a situation could take the DAO enzyme with the meal to sort of help head off side effects of meals where you might not have as much control over the ingredients. When you're eating out at restaurants, a lot of times you don't know how old the food is. You don't know what they're putting on there that you might react to. You might just be getting more high histamine foods that you might normally avoid. Another thing to think about is taking a probiotic that will help with histamine levels in the gut. Like I mentioned, a lot of the mast cells are in the gut. And so sometimes when people take a regular probiotic or a probiotic that they haven't looked carefully into, they'll find that they're even more reactive. And so in that kind of a situation, a histamine-friendly probiotic such as this one can be really helpful. Okay, so we talked about identifying the triggers and a little bit of info about how to do that and how to eliminate the common dietary triggers at least. And we talked about how to follow a special histamine diet, at least for a short window, to see if you get some relief with that. And the next step would be thinking about detoxification. So our bodies innately have processes for detoxification. The importance of detoxification in an allergy type situation is that you want to be able to eliminate the trigger and also all the immune chemicals that you made in response to the trigger from your body, so that it's not just perpetuating a never-ending cycle of reaction. And so you've got to move things out in a bowel movement. You've got to move things out in the blood through the urine. You've got to sweat. We have all these natural ways of detoxifying. And so many people with histamine issues need help with upregulating their innate ability to detox. So just to speak generally, last month I talked about this process in the webinar. So if you want to go to my website, you can check out last month's food-based cleansing webinar where we go into this in more detail. But there's 3 steps to detoxification in the body. Activation, which is enabled by a lot of the nutrients found in cruciferous vegetables. So that would be like the broccoli and the cabbage and the kale family. There's many, many members of the cruciferous family that provide the key nutrients for activation, which is where the body's identifying the thing it needs to detox. Then neutralization is where you take the thing you need to detox and you change it to make it water soluble. Neutralization is driven by adequate animal protein. And I would say typically the common client that I work with is not taking in enough good protein. A lot of the vegetarian proteins will be very high histamine. And so many times people get a little bit stuck in a pattern if they're eating a lot of vegetarian proteins. And the proteins that are most therapeutic in general are going to be animal-based ones. So protein is very important. Good quality protein is important for detoxification, as is glutathione, which is an antioxidant that's made in response to having a very nourishing diet, and sulfur. Sulfur can come from a number of vegetable-based foods, as well as things like Epsom salts. Then finally, the 3rd step is elimination. So having the regular bowel movements, being hydrated, eating enough fat to have healthy bowel movements, enough salt to have healthy bowel movements, and enough good bacteria to generate a healthy stool. I mentioned the body tune-up. So I published this book last year that talks about these basic principles of cleansing and how you can sort of eat your way to help your body with this innate detoxification. So you can get copies of my book at my website listed here, or at A Room of One's Own, which is a local bookstore. And you can think about even joining the workshop that will start here in a few weeks. When we do the body tune-up, we work through 4 steps that support detoxification. And so, of course, I would love for you to join the workshop, but even if you aren't, these are the things that you need to keep in mind for detoxification with allergies. You need to have a healthy gut. So you really need to focus on elimination, which is what we do in the first 10 days of the workshop. Then you need to focus on a healthy gut biome, which we do with the critter cleanse for 2 to 3 weeks. And then once you've got that support for the gut, you can work on the major elimination organs, the kidneys and the liver next. So the workshop will be beginning on Tuesdays at noon on October 10th. It'll be virtual. You can get a spot at a reduced rate if you register before September 26th. And I actually do have some scholarships available, both full and partial scholarships available. The deadline for that is tomorrow if you want to apply with a Google form that's available on my website. So that would be an example of heavy duty support for detoxification to help clear out those allergens. And you can take a histamine diet and overlay it on a detox program to get the best results. So once you've got some pieces in place to work on detoxification, then it may be time to move on to step 4. Step 4 is very important, looking at the gut and the overall immune system, because that's where the bulk of histamine is getting released in a person's body. And there's many different things that can happen in the gut that are contributing to allergies and histamine overload. One of the main things I see is that people have what's called leaky gut. Leaky gut or hyperpermeable intestines. And I have a whole nother webinar about this. You can watch my webinars for free at my website. This particular talk will be posted there in the next 1 to 2 weeks, so you can view it again. But I find leaky gut is a problem that most people with a lot of histamine issues have. It means that the gut lining, which is normally just one cell layer thick, the cells get pulled apart in the gut lining. And so the immune system, most of the immune system is just below the gut lining, as you can see pictured in the slide. The immune system is very freely interacting with anything in the digestive system, anything that comes into your body. I don't care if it's like organic blueberries and grass-fed, meat. It's like the best stuff. But if you've got leaky gut, your immune system is still going to be interacting with that in a way that is not ideal. And that is going to cause chronic immune issues until you can seal up the gut again. So it's very important to do things. You can follow a special diet, and then you have to actively take supplements to help seal up the gut. So that's a plug to watch that video if you want more information about that. Here's the video or the webinar. If you go to my website and you click on the news tabs, you'll see all of the previous webinars. The next important thing might be to do some more detective work and figure out what else is going on for the person that's creating the histamine issues. Up till now, all of these steps help the majority of people to feel a lot better. But some people still may not and may need to go this extra layer of detective work. Or some people may be thinking, okay, great, I've got this under control if I eat this histamine diet, but like, I don't want to eat this way forever. How do I actually fix the root cause? And so these are some tests that often help us identify what the root causes are. Why is the immune system under stress? Why is the gut under stress? What can we do to kind of stop this, this cycle? One of the things that I do with people one-on-one is look at their blood chemistry. So basic blood chemistry that a doctor can order, or I can help you order yourself. But I'm going to be looking at it very differently than a standard medical doctor. I'm going to be looking at how do I optimize your chemistry? Do you have enough vitamin D for immune modulation, for example? What do your electrolytes look like? Are you getting enough protein? Are you absorbing enough fat? So those are all things that we can get from these basic labs that can be really helpful to help just do some dietary interventions that are accessible for most people. The second thing that can be really helpful to do is a comprehensive stool test with a very sensitive lab. I like the lab Diagnostic Solutions because their technique is a PCR-based DNA test. So they're looking for the DNA of the things in the stool. And it's a lot more sensitive for things like H. pylori than other tests. I'm trying to figure out what's causing the histamine overload in the gut. And this test can be very helpful in identifying where somebody needs targeted support. The other type of test that can be really helpful is to do a food sensitivity panel. And there's a lot of options for that, but that sometimes helps take the guesswork out of which foods might be upsetting the person's digestion and causing histamine issues. This is just going in more detail about the GI map. Like I said, I like it because it's very sensitive. I always get relevant information from it. It's like a 4-page report that you get from it, but not to go on and on about this, but I just wanted to highlight one thing, which is this is an example from a client that I worked with, where you can see the overgrowth of opportunistic or bacteria that you really don't want to have there. So we've got Pseudomonas, a couple of species, Streptococcus, Citrobacter, Klebsiella. All of these came back flagged high on this stool sample. So that tells me one thing. First of all, remember this? Okay, this person's got 5 different opportunistic, 2 of which are potential autoimmune triggers in the gut, provoking the immune system to create histamine. 2, each one of these species that's here is known to be a high histamine producer. So you're not only provoking your own immune system to release histamine, you've got bugs, microbes in there that are in such an overgrowth state that they're releasing a lot of histamine. And so this is just an example of a case where this person needed herbal medicine or herbal remedies to help bring the gut biome back in balance, to allow the immune system to rest and to take away that extra histamine load that was just in there as a function of the gut biota being out of balance. So it's just an example of how one of these tests can be really instrumental in sort of getting to the bottom of a histamine issue. Okay, there's just a couple more things I want to talk about that can be really important for people with histamine problems, mold being a big one. So mold creates chemicals that are very aggravating and basically block detoxification in the body. So to a sensitive person who maybe already doesn't detox very well, mold can just be debilitating for that person. People can also inhale and get exposed to mold and have an internal low-level mold infection that's creating a lot of symptoms for them too. So it's always helpful to think about and maybe screen the person for mold. If you do identify that mold's a potential issue, there is extensive testing available through Cyrex Labs, which looks for antibodies to mold, so you know whether or not you have an internal mold infection that's at the root of the histamine issue. There's also a test called a Mycotoxin, which is a urine test that tests for the chemicals made by mold. So somebody who's maybe eating a lot of mold-rich foods or mycotoxin-rich foods, or just can't excrete mycotoxins very well, that test is going to provide a helpful roadmap to how to help them overcome that problem. In eliminating mold exposure, it's really important to eliminate foods that are high in mycotoxins, promote detoxification, like I mentioned, and also use binders. So binders are examples of supplements like activated charcoal, bentonite clay, chlorella, that help bind the mycotoxins and the things that are aggravating the immune system to them and pull them out. And I would say actually overall, for someone with histamine issues, binders can be really helpful to just pull out whatever the trigger is. So it's a supplement you take it on an empty stomach, and it just helps move things out in the bowel movement. So very safe. One last thing to think about with histamine issues is that oftentimes hormones are throwing people for a ringer. And the reason for that is that when there's more estrogen available, it will promote histamine release. So somebody who's already susceptible to allergies or a histamine issue may be experiencing more symptoms when they're estrogen dominant. So an example of that would be a woman who's going through a monthly cycle. Whenever her estrogen is peaking or is in dominance, such as when she's ovulating or before her period, she's going to be more symptomatic. She might have a migraine then. Men can also have issues with estrogen dominance. Both men and women create more estrogen and metabolize hormones like testosterone and progesterone into estrogen when our blood sugar is swinging. So it's really important to drill down in the diet and get those proteins established at every meal with lots of good vegetables, and choose foods that are low in sugar and carbs to help with a hormonal driven factor behind this type of a histamine issue. Okay, so we made it through the whole presentation. Just to review, the first thing you want to do is identify and try to remove that trigger. So that's really important to keep in mind through the whole process. That can include identifying the top 6 foods that can be triggers for the immune system. Next, you could consider following a histamine diet for a minimum of 1 week. If you follow it very closely and you feel much better, then you're oh, I'm kind of onto something. The next step would be to do things, adjust your diet, perhaps take different supplements that help promote detoxification. There's many ways to do this. You can look back to my food-based cleansing webinar from last month for other ideas. And then finally, step 4 is going a little bit deeper, doing things to heal leaky gut, doing things to identify if there is a mold problem, if there are histamine providers in the microbiome that are making things worse, if there's microbes in there that are making the histamine issue worse, or if there's maybe a hormonal imbalance in the picture that's also making things worse. So thanks so much for joining me. And I hope to see you next month when I talk about Kiss Those Sugar Blues Goodbye.